It's OPB Politics Now for Friday, November 17th. Portland City Council took a big step toward creating a new police oversight system this week, and they managed to make a lot of people unhappy in the process. Those who think police should be disciplined more were upset, and those who argue police discipline has gone too far were also critical. Do Portland City Commissioners care what the public thinks? We will discuss. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
And I'm Portland City Government reporter Alex Zielinski.
Alex, let's just take a step back here for a moment. Could you please remind us why the current police oversight system lacks credibility and has so many critics?
Yeah, so right now, when an officer is accused of misconduct, which can be anything from using profanity or using deadly force, that allegation goes to a city office called the Independent Police Review that is responsible for investigating that allegation. Despite its name, the office isn't very independent from the police department, which is where much of the criticism about it comes from. While there are non-police investigators looking into most of the low-level misconduct claims, the buck still really stops with police management. So if staff recommends an officer be penalized for alleged misconduct, the chief of police can still easily override it without any explanation. And for more egregious cases, like uses of deadly force, the investigation is done by a panel made up of majority police. So the whole idea of having police investigate their own colleagues, that has rubbed people the wrong way for a while. That plus the fact that a lot of these investigations and decisions happen behind closed doors. So the combination has been a source of a lot of mistrust of the police bureau and any sense of accountability.
And for a long time, people complained about the system, but it really took the social uprising in 2020 over systemic racism and police violence to get enough people paying attention to really make a change. So remind us what voters approved in 2020.
Yeah, right. So the ballot measure approved in November 2020, it directs the city to create a new office to oversee police misconduct that is basically directed and led by a new oversight board. So per that measure, the board would have the ability to investigate all types of misconduct cases and mandate officer discipline that can't be overturned by police leadership. It goes even further to remove police from the equation by barring people who have worked for any law enforcement agency or their families from serving on the board. That measure also directed City Council to appoint members of the public to this interim commission that would be responsible for writing the rules and details of how the oversight system will eventually be added to city code. It's worth noting, too, that this was an overwhelmingly successful measure. It passed with 82% of the vote, which is pretty unheard of for a lot of ballot measures in Oregon.
So the measure directed a committee to write the guidelines for the new police oversight system. Tell us a bit about the committee process and what the group came up with.
Sure. So the committee, which was made up of folks with a range of experience and expertise, I think 20 people total, they spent months researching other cities' police oversight programs and interviewing experts about best practices, all of that stuff. So they eventually cobbled together a draft set of guidelines, and a lot of it is pretty dry administrative stuff. But some of it added new details to the ballot measure proposal. For instance, it proposed that the oversight board be made up of 33 members. It mandated that investigations take no longer than 6 months and ensure that a majority of investigatory meetings are open to the public. It also sets up an appeals process.
So that is not the proposal passed by the city council this week. What happened?
Yeah, you're right. So after this commission presented their proposal to City Council in September, city attorneys got to work combing through the document for potential legal issues. This is pretty normal process for any policy to go through before becoming city code. And attorneys ended up slimming the proposal by a lot, saying that some of the details could land the city in litigation. But what really stood out the most wasn't what attorneys removed, but it was what they added. And I think it's important to note here that attorneys were also working closely with City Council staff on this rewrite. And it's no secret that council members are pretty critical of the ballot measure as written. Mostly, we've heard concerns about the measure's rule barring law enforcement from oversight and a lot of fear that it would just be a mechanism that's unfairly biased against the police. So that's why it wasn't a big surprise to see the rewritten proposal includes phrasing about a new nomination committee, basically a committee that nominates people to serve on the oversight board. Under the new policy, that committee must contain at least 3 law enforcement officials. So while police may be banned from serving on the board under this policy, they can help decide who sits on the board. Another addition is a clause barring anyone who has a, quote, objective demonstrated bias for or against law enforcement from sitting on the board. And it's really unknown how that's determined. So these heavy edits by city attorneys and city hall staff, they unsurprisingly upset members of the committee tasked with writing the original rules. People who spent nearly 2 years volunteering their time to create a plan that reflects the intent of the ballot measure. Here's Faith Aiken, a committee member, addressing council about the change proposal this week.
What we presented was thorough, informed, within scope, and consistent with what the voters asked us to do. What you handed back is rushed, feckless, and spits in the face of people who have experienced violence at the hands of police.
So Aiken and many others said this new plan essentially subverts the voters' intent when they approved the new system in 2020. Which was to remove police from influencing their accountability system.
One side that we haven't heard from quite as much throughout this process is the people who feel like criticizing the police is not warranted. What did that group have to say?
So I feel like a kind of under-the-radar movement came out of the racial justice protests of 2020 that is still getting legs. It's made up of people who supported police throughout the protests and opposed calls for police accountability reforms. People pushing back on the movement to shrink police departments and power and raising alarms about police not being staffed up enough to adequately respond to crime. So City Council also heard from some of those folks this week. They expressed concern that strengthening the police discipline system could discourage police from applying to work in Portland and just be bad for police morale. Some even went as far to say that council should halt all progress on this project and instead take the idea back to the ballot, basically arguing that voters got it wrong and would vote differently now. Here's how one woman named Kristen Olson put it before council.
If you do not send this ballot measure back to the voters, it will continue to decimate our police force.
While this kind of testimony seems to fall to the right of Portland's progressive city council, it actually felt really reflective of how some city commissioners feel about the ballot measure. I've heard several of them mention how they believe voters' minds may have changed about public safety and policing since 2020, and really think that it's not the right moment to focus on punitive measures.
So everyone seemed unhappy with this outcome, those who wanted to see more police accountability and those who felt like the police are doing a tough job and are being overly criticized. Why did city council members approve this proposal?
Yeah, so at the council meeting where commissioners unanimously approved the attorney updated proposal, they said they felt pressure to move this system forward, especially since it's been 3 years since voters approved it. At the same time, it's still a ways off from being established in city code. That's because the proposal needs to be vetted by the U.S. Department of Justice first. Our listeners will surely recall that the city has been caught up in a settlement agreement with the DOJ since 2014, with the feds alleging that Portland police used disproportionate force against people with mental illness. Under that agreement, any changes to a police oversight board in Portland needs to get the DOJ sign-off. So I think most commissioners are pretty eager to move to the next step of this process and also really trust the city attorney's advice. So I think it would have taken a lot for them to incorporate new feedback from the public at this step.
Taking a step back here, this is not the first time this council has appeared to take steps that undercut the public. What does that say about Portland or this political time?
Yeah, you're right. Earlier this year, we talked about how a few city commissioners tried to roll back a ballot measure that set the city on course to overhaul its form of government. At the time, they implied that voters may not have known what they were agreeing to. That plan ultimately failed, but it does show how willing city council is to tweak voter-approved ideas. I think this is a fair example of how they can kind of tinker around the edges of a ballot measure to get what they want without completely gutting it.
Well, Alex, thank you for joining me here today and breaking this down and following this lengthy process.
Thank you for having me.
That is it for this week's episode of OPB Politics Now. This episode was produced by Andrew Thien, our audio engineer is Stephen Cray, and our music comes from Audio Network. We're taking next week off, but we will be back December 1st with a new episode. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org.